Dr. Richard Mills is a senior lecturer in Irish literature and popular culture. He's currently working on a monograph entitled The Beatles and Fandom, and contributes regularly to media discussions of popular culture, including interviews for BBC's Last Word, RTE Drive Time and The Vanessa Feltz Show. Richard has published on Bernard Macleverty and written an article at Orange and Green Dilemma, Violence and Traumatised Subject in Macleverty's Screenplays of Cow and Lamb, and has interviewed Macleverty personally for the Irish Literary Society in London. Richard's interest in comedy and popular culture can be seen in his article on Eric Idle and the Counterculture. Richard's enthusiasm for popular music can be seen in his essay on David Bowie and English heritage, which is part of the edited collection of essays Mad Dogs and Englishness in collaboration with Lee Brooks and Mark Donnelly, and his article David Bowie and Glam Fashion in the peer-reviewed journal Clothing Cultures. Richard has just completed an essay on Captain Beefheart, Tim Buckley and Jimi Hendrix for the volume Beasts of the Deep, Sea Creatures and Popular Culture, which is due out in 2018. Richard also continues to publish on Irish and American literature in Irish Studies Review and Air Ireland. His article on George Saunders' Escape to Spiderhead will be published next year.
Okay, thanks very much, Michelle. I'll try to condense this into about 25 minutes. I feel like a lecturer now. Anybody that hasn't read the essay should leave and go and read it. That's a joke. Right. 10th of December by... Escape from Spiderhead is a 2013 story by George Saunders, which appeared in a collection called 10th of December. And I'm going to make... There's a couple of salient points I'm going to make in this lecture. And it's also very nascent research because I want to try to get some ideas about how I'm going to finish this. It's very much at the idea stage, and I'm going to see how I'm going to develop this piece of research. Received wisdom so far on Saunders is that he's a political satirist. As those of you who have read the story will know that, because he satirises the drug industry in this book. He has sort of neologisms where he creates new names of drugs. Darkenflox, which is a depressant. Earth-Euglide, which turns someone who is very inarticulate into having the poetic diction of a poet. And what happens is that this person has committed a heinous crime and is incarcerated in this really strange dystopian place called Spiderhead. So, political satire is one thing that George Saunders does. Also, he's really quite postmodernist, surreal, picaresque. Any of those words are used to describe his writing. He's very much in the tradition of Kurt Vonnegut, Donald Barthelemy, and I said the satire of Mark Twain. Also, vernacular voice is essential to an understanding of this story. As I said, he actually gets the characters to speak in colloquial voice, and when they're administered this drug in this correctional facility, it changes the way that they speak. So those are the main themes I'm going to look at in Escape from Spiderhead. Also, it's very strange that Saunders has also developed this interest in Buddhism as well, very recently. Because I always thought of him as a very violent writer. There's a lot of violence in his work, and for some reason he's developed this interest in Eastern religions, which I'll talk about at the end of the lecture. But it's also important in this story because in the final denouement of the story, the character commits suicide after being administered Darkenflox and actually bashes her head off the corner of a table. And then, very strangely for a 21st century writer, the story has a Buddhist ending in a sense. The main character leaves his body and goes and sits on top of the roof of the jail, the correctional facility, which is very unusual, and I don't know why Saunders has weaved this idea in about souls and transmigration of souls and reincarnation and out-of-body experiences. It's something that he does quite a lot. It's an interest that he's starting to develop. Also, up to this point, up to 2017, he has only been a short story writer. He's now come out with his first novel, which is called Lincoln in the Bardo. And for those of you who have any interest in Buddhism will know that Bardo is one of the stages, a bit like limbo, that you go after you die. And I'll talk a little bit about that to end the lecture. So that's an overview of what I'm going to say in today's talk. A little bit of background about George Saunders as well. As I said, we can break it down into doing a couple of main themes. He writes about politics, a political commentator, a political essayist, which is, again, fascinating because of his interest. I didn't really see his interest in Buddhism. I didn't really think that was going to happen. But it's there right from the start of his early fiction. So anyway, he's an essayist who writes about politics, and he has collected his essays in the Brain Dead Megaphone, which really is a state of the nation piece about America. Absolutely fascinating. He also talks about his interest in Buddhism. He talks about his literary hero, who is Mark Twain. So again, this political satire is going to be a recurrent theme in the talk as well. He's also written short stories about totalitarianism. I mean, there's also that aspect in Saunders' work, very Orwellian, very Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. There's a sci-fi dimension to what he does as well. I mean, when you first see the title, Escape from Spiderhead, you expect a J.G. Ballard story, you expect Margaret Atwood, you expect this strange futuristic place, which it is, but also the analogies with 21st century America are very, very explicit in this short story. So very quickly, he writes essays on the state of the nation, politics, cultures, literary heroes, political satire. The Brief and Frightening Reign of Phil is a short story about totalitarianism. In Persuasion Nation, again, is another book of political essays. Also, this strange little creature here is called a Gapper, and he writes children's stories as well. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the lecture as well a little bit. The Very Persistent Gappers of Frith, which is beautifully illustrated by Lane Smith, and it's a gorgeous book, it's a gorgeous production. Perhaps up to 10th of December, his most famous book is Civil War Land in Bad Decline. Now, as we go through the narrative and look at some of the text of Escape from Spiderhead, any people here, I know there's a few George Saunders fans here, what they will notice is that Civil War Land in Bad Decline is absolutely the same ending as Escape from Spiderhead. It's set in a Civil War land theme park, and a Vietnam vet goes completely crazy and starts to get very violent. So you can see what Saunders is doing here. He's writing about simulations of the real, he's writing about theme parks, he's writing about consumerism. He's been very satirical about it, but he always has this, quite often he uses the same ending. And at the end of Civil War Land in Bad Decline, the central character dies, leaves his body and goes off to some ethereal realm. Now, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about that. One of the reviews of Escape from Spiderhead, which a lot of you have read, there's a lot of debate. A lot of people don't like the ending. I mean, I'm naturally very misanthropic and like my stories to very negative endings. When the central character in Escape from Spiderhead commits suicide by dashing his brains against the corner of the table, that's where I would have left it. Maybe that says more about me than George Saunders. And also, it's interesting as well, we'll get back to this in a second, he delivered an address at Syracuse University when the students were graduating. He called it Some Thoughts on Kindness. So he's really very interested in this Buddhist idea of kindness, being gentle, helping your fellow man. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end as well, once I start to synchronise my talk with the slides, which might take a while. Also, he's really into satirising theme parks, simulations of the real, which he does when he satirises Disney, Dollywood, all of those theme parks in Civil War Land in Bad Decline. He also does it in an absolutely fantastic collection called Pastoralia, which is, I kid you not, it's people that have to dress and act as Neanderthals in a theme park. And it's a very spot-on satire of the working conditions in, say, Disney or a theme park. It's absolutely hilarious. So he's very imaginative, he's very surreal. I read last night, actually, as well, one of his influences, as well as all the literary influences, he's very influenced by Monty Python as well, which is, I write and publish in that, so it's interesting that we have that interest. He's of that generation, though. He's that age. So, Escape from Spiderhead. He's really, Thomas Pynchon is seen as another big influence, that picaresque postmodernism that you see in Pynchon. So the critical reviews of his work have been huge. He's been on David Letterman, he's a bestseller, he's cemented a huge literary reputation. What I would say, let's get back to the brass tacks of the story. The first thing you notice about Saunders is the exhilarating explosion of slang. And he talks about, when he's interviewed, he always talks about his suburban background in Chicago. And he really captures colloquial American voice. And as I said, that has hilarious results in Escape from Spiderhead. Neologisms, as you'll see in a second, he makes up drug names for this story as well, fake product names. Also, he is very interested in getting into the heads of the characters. Few writers, according to Dick Wolf in The Observer, said that are as good at transcribing thought. And again, this links very strongly to his interest in colloquial language. Again, it's another point that I'll build on a little bit later in the talk. Satirist as well. Interestingly enough, we're getting a quite an unusual picture about this writer. A very melange of strange, diverse interests. Political satire, political essayist, an interest in Buddhism, which surprised me. Comedy. All of these things are in his work. A lot of reviewers of 10th of December noticed that American fiction became a very apolitical affair, but Saunders' darkly comic short stories are constantly compared to Mark Twain because of the satire of consumerism, theme parks, and in this story, incarceration, crime and punishment, if you like. Also, this relates very explicitly to Escape from Spiderhead. A Saunders story typically operates by some gross exaggeration of contemporary life. It's set in the not too distant future where things have gone irrevocably haywire. And in this story, that's absolutely what happens. Also, very much, you get a mixture of comedy, pathos, absurdity, realism in his books. And quite often it's so subtly done, you don't really feel the political sting till you finish the story. He's not very hectoring. He doesn't furnish the reader with dates, political names, anything like that. Because as you know, if you write something political, it dates very quickly. I mean, not everybody's capable of writing Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats, for example, where, he actually imbues it with so much more than just listing like a journalist documentary facts of the rising. I think that Saunders is very much like that as well. The politics is there, but it's not explicitly in people's face. He sets out, I suppose, as F.R. Leavis would call it, he sets out to have a moral, ethical dimension in his fiction as well. F.R. Leavis talks about moral seriousness in a text, and we actually get that in Escape from Spiderhead as well. I think he is trying to change the way people think, but in a very subtle fashion. Okay, there's a lot here. I'll just move through quickly to the story itself. The story begins with Saunders on page 45 of the book having unusual names for the drugs. He creates lots of neologisms. For example, the story starts with my Moby Pack word, and this central protagonist who has killed someone has been experimented on in this correctional facility, and he's given a Moby pack where drugs are pumped into him. So he's treated as a guinea pig. And again, you can see how he really masters colloquial voice. My Moby pack word, soon the interior garden looked really nice. Everything seemed super clear. So everything seems super clear. He's talking in this colloquial way, this slang, this sort of suburban talk, which really helps us understand the psychology of the character. And he continues, garden looked nice, I said, super clear. So what happens? Here's where the comedy meets a satire of language, a satire of crime and punishment, if you like. So we've got the central character suddenly gives some verbalucci, TM, trademarked. Okay, again, TM, trademarked. These drugs are trademarked. A lot of academic work so far, as we all help, has been about this satire of consumerism. So I mean, if I started writing like that, I'd just be going over old ground. So he added some verbalucci, again, really quite funny. Verbalucci suddenly makes you eloquent, articulate. So a character that could hardly express anything and has been involved in violence and speaks in a very colloquial voice, suddenly verbalucci is added to the Moby pack, and soon I was feeling the same things but saying them better. It was something about the bushes and whatnot. It made you just want to lay out there and catch rays and think your happy thoughts, if you get what I mean. And he's still talking in colloquial voice, and then suddenly he starts to have the voice of almost a romantic poet. Heather looked super good. We now begin freestyling re-our sensations and thoughts and elevated diction with 80% increased vocab, our well-articulate thoughts being recorded for late analysis. So he starts to speak like an academic, he starts to speak like a poet. There's lots of little jokes about language as well. When he tries to describe the beauty of the garden they can see from the jail, he calls it non-narrative mind scenery, which I find quite amusing as well. And then, I dare say, they become poets. So you can see what interesting comments he's making about consciousness, about self, about ideas, when you actually start to alter someone's perception by giving them drugs, and how delicate perception is as well. So that's another dimension in this story. And then after the drug wears off, he goes, but in terms of feelings, I basically had nada left. He goes back to his own suburban colloquial voice. Then another drug is administered, which is a love drug, and he becomes very attracted to the other inmate in the institution. Did I love her or her me? No. After the drug is worn off as well. So another very interesting point about consciousness and how it develops. And there's no fixed sort of human essence in a way, no I. It's something that's constantly changing in this story. But here's probably the most gruesome, macabre bit of the story is Darkenflock's trademark. It doesn't sound too pleasant. It sounds a little bit jokey because it's obviously this depressant and it really makes people suicidal. In fact, it results in the death of the central protagonist in the story. After he takes is administered Darkenflocks, still honestly I felt sad inside. And on page 56 of the book you get a description of Darkenflocks. Imagine the worst you've ever felt times 10. And here's where we start getting the satire on crime and punishment, almost very, very interesting comments on crime and punishment. The central character has to choose who he's going to give Darkenflocks to. He has to pick the two characters, and he really didn't want to do it. And that was true, I really didn't care. It was like, if I put you in Spiderhead and give you choice, which of these two strangers would you like to send into the shadow of the valley of death? By this using Darkenflocks. And as we see, the choice the central character has is he doesn't want to do it, and he eventually commits suicide as the only escape. Also, another one of the drugs is Veritalk, which makes one quite literal. Also, drugs can make incredibly good at mathematics, for example. I found I could stand 15 hours straight at a fake cash register, miraculously suddenly able to do extremely hard long division problems in my mind. So again, this idea of a fixed essence of an I is transgressed in this story as well. There's lots of different levels to it. Also, there's something beautiful about the punitive aspects of Crime and Punishment. At one point in page 70, the central character says there's not much data in crime. So really sending up why these drugs and ridiculing why these drugs are being used. Also, there's a downer, a tranquilizer called Docilride. Also, every drug has TM beside it. This is a satire on branding and consumerism, and the story ends with an out-of-body experience. I'll just go on another 5 minutes and try to sum everything up. Also, we've seen that the sympathy is with the central protagonist, even though he has committed a horrible murder. The sympathy seems to be with the central character in this story, and he seems to have absolutely changed into something different. He seems to have given up his violent past, which is very interesting. So all Saunders' ideas and kindness, his interest in Buddhism, has a bit of light at the end of the story, again, which I'm a little disappointed by. Again, which direction I'm going to take this? There's so many academic pieces out now about simulacra, simulations, applying Baudrillard, talking about consumerism, hyperreality, all of these ideas. So I'm going to try to possibly steer a little bit clear of that as well. I'll just sort of move towards the end here because there's quite a lot. This is quite a long lecture in a sense. We actually do a writing exercise in CPW in this, where I get the students to imagine themselves in the workroom where they do these experiments, and the students have to describe the workroom for 5 minutes and then read it to the rest of the group. Then they have to describe the interior garden after taking Nature Glide or Earth Admire, which I still find is quite a good joke by Saunders as well. And finally, the last exercise in the writing seminar is that they have to imagine they've taken Darkenflox and describe the depression. Yes. No, but they're quite ironic about it. No one sort of really tries to fly out the window like a Saunders story or anything like that. Right, I can sum this up in a couple of minutes. 10th of December by Saunders. I love this slide. It really does sum him up. In the world of a Saunders story, petty grudges become irreconcilable. Lit capitalism makes inscrutable gadgets. The stories are built in violence. Suburban idols as well. Inconceivable drugs, which you see from this story. Fascism becomes polite office speak.
Sorry.
What's that?
Baby step.
Oh yes.
You didn't mention that in your presentation.
It's yet to come.
Oh.
The money shot. Yeah, just wait to the end. And woe unto us as the world sort of drifts inexorably towards this sort of strange corporate place that Saunders is a little uncomfortable with. He's obviously quite a lefty at one point, and it's strange that he didn't really take religion out of his worldview at all. There's a vestige of this in his thought, and you can see this in the stories, which again, as I said, his influences, his ideas, his style are a melange of very interesting philosophies. So conclusions, what would I say about Saunders? Dave Eggers says there is no one more essential to our national sense of self and sanity. Again, placing him very firmly in the tradition of Mark Twain as a social satirist. Also, another thing about Twain is he's very funny. Another thing about Twain is, think of Huck Finn, is colloquial voice, American voice, which is absolutely key to understanding both writers. Foucault said there's no glory in punishment in the birth of the prison. And that seems one of the central ideas in the story. Here, I still have left. Oh, I haven't. Here are some of the drugs that are used in the story, the terms he's invented. Veritol, an honesty-boosting serum which induces a state of complete straightforwardness. Okay? Like you could just go to Belfast and people would talk like that. You don't have to take Veritol. Guilt Away, where you become very cooperative. Vivistif, a series of drugs designed to enhance both performance and pleasurable sexual experience. I've got some outside this suitcase from Lee Monson. I didn't plan on making these jokes, it's all spontaneous, it's all me, sorry. Verbalucci, again, I do find this one is absolutely key for understanding colloquial voice. It's one of the most imaginative parts of the story, where someone who's inarticulate, monosyllabic, suddenly has the voice of an academic, or suddenly has the voice of this polysyllabic poet. And it is so funny the way they move from saying, hey, the garden looks super clear, to suddenly get into rhapsodies about nature. Darkenflox, of course. Darkenflox is a terror drug, probably the biggest downer depressant that Saunders can imagine. So you can see in a way it is set slightly in the future, but it's also very much a satire of drugs in our society, pharmaceutical companies, consumerism, prisons, all of this stuff. I won't go through all of it. Dose and Ride as well is an obedience drug. So again, we can see the whole Huxley, Orwell ideas in his work as well. Now, it's very interesting. I will sum up just a couple of minutes because we're running out of time. But yeah, don't worry. No, don't go. It's very interesting that Saunders has said a novel is just a story that hasn't discovered a way to be brief. And I will end because he's now published his first novel in March 2017. This is, again, the final denouement, which a lot of reviewers, a lot of people are a little bit uncomfortable about in this story. From somewhere, something kind asked, would you like to go back? It's completely up to you. Your body appears salvageable. So the central character has committed suicide and is leaving his body, and we get this voice which must be some sort of deity. And this is again very experimental, very brave to talk about something spiritual in a very, cynical, irreligious 21st century. So I'm really interested. He comes from a left-wing perspective, but hasn't completely got religion out of his worldview. No, I thought, no thanks, I've had enough. And he flutters off, and his life flashes before his eyes, which will bring us to his new novel in a second. Interesting, again, a few good jokes. He makes a joke about this drug being used by governments, by intelligence agencies. Say we've two rival dictators in a death grudge, assuming ED 289-290 develops nicely in pill form, allow me to split each dictator a Mickey, soon their tongues are down each other's throats, and doves of peace are pooping on their epaulets. So again, good sort of Monty Python, Kurt Vonnegut humour in the short story. And I will sum up a few comments on colloquial voice. He's actually, as I say, another thing that is part of his literary palette is he likes to write children's stories, and he inhabits very much the character, the voice of the character. For example, in Fox 8, a story, he becomes the voice of the fox. Dear reader, first may I say sorry for any words I spell wrong because I'm my fox, so don't write or spell perfect. So again, in this story, he inhabits the character who talks in suburban colloquialisms and teen speak, and then it moves into different mode of expression. He does this all through his work. So again, this is the 10th of December, just to sum up. Fox 8 is again a children's story that people should read. A few influences on his work just to end. I have gone on a little bit, but we did start slightly, didn't we, Michelle? I do find a lot of books on Barthélemy say that notice the similarity between John Saunders and Barthélemy, and I can see it. I actually think that Saunders' work's a little bit better structured and in many ways more interesting, but that's just a very subjective opinion. The 21st century writer who most embodies Barthelme's spirit was Barthelme, and Saunders said that Barthelme's stories give the reader a series of pleasure bursts. And you can see that from Escape from Spiderhead as well. The subject matter is really quite grim. It's about experimenting on human subjects and guinea pigs. It's about incarceration. It's about consciousness and how it changes. It's about there's no fixed essence. It's a satire of consumerism. It's a satire of corporate America. All of these things, but it's also got plenty of pleasure bursts and good jokes as well, which I'm sure people that I know quite a lot of you have read it and will agree with that as well. Vonnegut, I can see the influence everywhere in Saunders. I mean, Kurt Vonnegut, picaresque, Vonnegut's characters, he really inhabits their voice as well when he writes fiction. A massive influence. Also, I think this is interesting, Mark Twain, as I said, not only a huge influence in terms of political satire, but Saunders has said about Twain, he's one of those writers who go where the logic of the story takes them and are perfectly happy to break form or even make a dorky, badly shaped thing to do it. Well, that really fits with the structure of the Saunders tale, and it really fits with the voice that he inhabits. He will obviously, all fiction writers know that you have to write in the voice of your character. You know, first year classes, they very often intrude. There's an authorial intrusion. It's very awkward. It doesn't often work. Saunders really is good for teaching, but you've got to inhabit colloquial voice. Now, I will sum up here as well. This was his graduation address to Syracuse University in 2014. It's called Congratulations, by the way, Some Thoughts on Kindness. So I don't know where I think I do know where Saunders is going with this. He's really interested in being kind and Buddhism, and it's sort of the political satire, his political, that template that really fired him in the start, seems to be somehow morphing and being subsumed by this interest in Eastern religions and pacifism. In his book of essays, he does write about travelling to India, and he writes quite seriously about watching Buddhists meditate, and he writes seriously about mystical states, which, again, we discussed that quickly after the lecture. And just to sum up, a lot of the themes, this is his first novel, which came out March 2017. What's happened here is that these endings of the stories where these strange out-of-body experiences and this spiritual aspect in his work, which some critics like, some critics don't like, this has really come to fruition in his new book, Lincoln in the Bardo. I'm still halfway through it, so I'm not going to say anything too enlightening about it. But the premise is that it's about Abraham Lincoln and the death of his first son, Willie. And Willie, his son, goes to this Tibetan state of Bardo, and he describes the people and entities that he meets in this metaphysical, mystical realm. So again, it's very brave, a very unusual subject matter, and I was astonished by this. If you started as a fan, because I'm a Saunders fanboy, and I started with Civil War Land in Bad Decline, and I was very interested in, as I said, the political satire of consumerism, the violence, and I was a little bit nonplussed by the ending, but I thought that was just one ending he just chose randomly. But it seems to be that he's fascinated now by this Buddhist state of Bardo, which again I'd be interested to talk about that afterwards as well. And Michelle said to me last night, I said, what do you think of George Saunders? And she said the phrase, the creation of other worlds. And I think that's what we see a little bit in Escape from Spiderhead. He creates this nightmare near future where a subject is experimented on with these unusual drugs, and he uses this as a vehicle for political satire, for making comments about the I and about the self. So that's a few thoughts on my nascent research on Escape from Spiderhead, and I'd really welcome some questions and some ideas about where I should take this research. So thank you very much. Thanks.
From what you're saying, it's kind of going towards now. Is it like the Buddhism and metaphysical stuff? Is it moving towards like a being apolitical. So because you can't find answers in a down-to-earth.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. In his collection of essays, you get an essay on politics, but now it seems to be more of an interest in this Buddhist spiritual aspect in many
Is it
ways.
because you can't stop being frustrated by the political questions, so you find your peace elsewhere?
I also think it's a very down-to-earth interpretation of it. I think that from what I've read he really loves his success. He's really happy with his job. He loves his family, and it's so precious for him. The transient of it is really upsetting him. So if everything's ephemeral, I think he wants to have this interest in Buddhism, because the central tenet of that is that everything is ephemeral, and you're not supposed to get really attached to the world. So I think that paradox is going on in Saunders' head. Also, I do think when people start to become really famous and do well, they feel they have to make new pronouncements. And there's something egotistical at the heart of this as well. Would you agree with that? To sort of
I'd have to reread the early ones.
yeah, but I mean that's just very opinionated. Okay, thanks. I've taken. What's the drug that makes you direct? The one.
Ulster.
Ulster talk. Where is it? Where's the Ulster talk drug? So this is developing in stuff.
They're very talk.
Which one is it?
Very talk.
Oh yeah, very talk. But Cecile just asked me a question and I answered in very talk, which I thought was quite amusing. Has anyone got a question actually? And I'll slide off this chair. Carol. No, that's it. Joe, sorry, Carol.
I like the spirituality element, and I think it's particularly interesting that it's Buddhism, because from my understanding of Buddhism, which is by no means expert, it's not a religion that has a god, it's more about worldview.
Yeah, that's true. The laity would say that Buddha's God, but esoteric Buddhism is that no, you go to this selfless nirvana state. Absolutely, yeah.
Is that necessarily in contrast with the political satire? Because I think there tends to be a sort of a view that there's political satire, and then if you want to get to religion, you move away from that kind of stuff and you find answers within. But is there this kind of emphasis on being kind? Is it a satire of cruelty? Is it a satire of what we do to each other in the modern world?
That's a very good question. So you're saying that his spiritual ideas and his satire aren't necessarily distant cousins. They're wedded quite close together in a sense. I can see that as well. But also, if you just pick up any book introducing postmodernism, for example, the one religion that they say can encompass lots of different ideas and put them together in a worldview is Buddhism, because it doesn't have this monotheistic God at the centre of it. So I think that's very attractive to Saunders. Also, another thing I think, again, it was my very talk answer to Cecile was that I do think I've read everything he's written and most of the academic work on him. You can tell he really cherishes his students. He really loves his work. He's got a really tight family. He seems to be really in love with everything he does. So the natural corollary to that is, it's ephemeral. It can change. It can go at any minute. So I think that's really attracted him to Buddhism, because if my memory serves me correctly, the central tenet of Buddhism, the first noble truth, is that all life is suffering and that all life is transient. So you've got to detach yourself from the world a little bit, and I think he's trying to juggle that. Secondly, the more Occam's razor version of it, direct version, the very top take on it as well. I do think when you become a celebrity, which he is, he's on David Letterman, he's in the New York Times, he's everywhere. I think that celebrities do start to feel they have to make big pronouncements and things. So his politics was always subtle. I feel that he really feels he's got to get some sort of totalitizing philosophy that explains things and makes sense to himself. And he's also been asked about this.
Yeah, it's a platform.
Yeah, I think it's a platform in many ways.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he was sitting here now, I mean, I've met him and he was really funny. There's a lot of humour in there as well. He's
travelled in India and he's written about people that have meditated for months and don't seem to be eating and seem to be getting into these mystical states. And this completely surprised me. When I read him, I thought, I'm never going to end up reading about Buddhism and religion from this writer. I mean, people that have read Civil War, Land and Bad Climb would be really surprised. And as I say, the rest of the stories in 10th of December are very biting satires of, I suppose, late American capitalism, if you like, if you want to be corny about it. They seem to be really direct critiques of theme parks, of life in the suburbs, of people that can't pay mortgages, of people who are broke, of American mistalk, misuse of language. So really, social issues, I think, were paramount in his work, but it's been slowly building up to this interest in religion, which comes out in the new novel. So, yeah, sorry, did that answer your question? Okay.
To continue what you were saying about the fact that he's well known and you feel that, do you think he feels he has to have a message? Because if you read, I haven't read him, but from what I've heard, it's very critical, very negative, very dark.
Yes.
And do you think that perhaps reaching that part of his career where he's well known and people are awaiting with bated breath for his first novel to come out, do you think he feels that he has to have a message? It has to come out into something positive.
Well, yeah,
or is he trying to find a positive interpretation in, I don't know.
No, it's a really good question, because if you think of people that I compared him with in the lecture, Kurt Vonnegut remained ironic, satirical, angry through his whole life. He didn't really... Any unusual, eccentric bits in Vonnegut were science fiction or, stuff to do with alien abduction, like in Slaughterhouse-Five. He never went down this route of writing about religion. Who's the other person I mentioned?
The quote we had from Vonnegut on the screen was, "Remember, babies, you've got to be kind."
Yes, that's true.
So there's a difference between religion and compassion.
Yeah.
And so those two things can be split out.
Yeah.
And I haven't read enough Vonnegut to know if that "always remember, you've got to be kind, babies" is present in all his work.
It actually, it is. I mean, Vonnegut, obviously, it's a very obvious answer. Slaughterhouse-Five is an anti-war novel, and that those ideas are there in nearly all of his fiction.
The idea of satire is basically that it's unkind. If you're satirising someone, you're basically saying, you may be a human being, but I'm not going to ignore that. I'm just going to point out, I'm just going to be negative. That's what satire is. So it's that movement from satire to kindness that's
very interesting as well. And I suppose with satire, you're going to use hyperbole. You're going to be over the top. You're going to exaggerate.
Yeah.
You're going to throw everything at it.
Yeah.
So that's why you get invented drugs. I mean, this is all very serious, but there's really quite funny, knowing little jokes the whole way through this story.
Because it's so close to reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's completely bonkers and dystopian, but at the same time, it's very, very close to our reality.
Yeah.
I think there's actually, some of those drugs, there could be an attraction to. I mean, you can see, if you had a drug that induced love, and there are two countries going to war, you might say, well, shortcut, couldn't you go to I mean, what are the kind of social issues that we're dealing with at the moment? War, famine, a lot of the famine brought about by war and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see the attraction in those drugs, and on the other hand, if you start to go down that road, then you come across the kind of moral and ethical boundaries of where does that stop. So you might start off with something that's lovely, like love and kind, but then you end up with darker drugs because you want to punish people for being bad.
This is.
I said I'm going to zoom. I'd say one thing before I go. What's interesting about that is that he's not presenting us a world in which that exists. He's presenting a world.
Oh, sorry, we finished in 60 seconds.
He's presenting a world in which people are doing research in order to get it from a commercial point of view.
Yes, that's true. Also, I just
perhaps a Brave New World is the world in which this exists. Whereas he's sort of saying the bridge between us and that is that it's in someone's interest to commercially develop these drugs.
Yeah.
It struck me as a bit kind of arts and science factor going on as well.
Uh-huh.
We're going down this route where, in order to prove something, you've got to do so scientifically. You can't argue with age, you can't talk about emotion. Those girls have to be chosen on the basis of, well, which ones scientifically we have to prove.
Absolutely.
both of them.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a kind of, almost like that bigger argument that we're all back in, I suppose, academia at the moment, between proving yourself in another paradigm that actually isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
So that you're having to justify yourself in a way which it can't work. You know, how can you choose between two people sides? How can you want somebody to die in order to prove that your drug is worthwhile? You know, so it's kind of, it struck me that there was that kind of tension, is drawn attention to, that we are battling between art and science, not that we're always feeling that we have to explain ourselves in another vocabulary, if you like, which isn't appropriate to us. You know?
Absolutely true.
That's really interesting.
I mean, that whole idea about fixed essence, the I, it's very much, because the history of Western philosophy, I suppose, is based on Descartes, I think, therefore I am, whereas Eastern philosophy, they're very interested in interrogating, breaking down the ego, and there's something about that in this story as well. And it's really interesting what you were saying about drugs as well, Carol, because I think we have the CIA and intelligence to thank for LSD, and suddenly it percolates into the counterculture, and it's all these naughty hippies. But you know, the British Army, they experimented in the British Army with LSD. It was going to be used as a truth serum. So it's fascinating that the story, you know, talks about those issues as well.
I think with a lot of these things, I think that they've got analogies in life that aren't necessarily drugs.
Yes.
That are something that can be sold to make you happy, to make you sad, to make you whatever. And those are things that exist.
Yeah, actually, when you said that, it really makes me think of Brave New World. I'd forgotten about that. Escape from Spiderhead. This near future, this dystopia, where everything can be medicated. You can change. If you're sad, just take a drug. Just pop a drug.